right. Next plant, and this is certainly a major player here at the park and probably in many homes, is bittersweet. Bittersweet is called Oriental Bittersweet or Asiatic Bittersweet. Bittersweet, we usually just call it bittersweet, even though it's officially called Oriental or Asiatic Bittersweet. It's different from the native bittersweet, of which we still have some in the state, but most of what we see growing up and around trees and shrubs and desirable vegetation is the non-native Oriental Bittersweet. This is a woody vine, so it's perennial. It often is identified a couple of different ways, but you have to be careful because the native bittersweet can also have some of these characteristics. Bittersweet, it is a vine, but it can start out more like a ground cover, to just creep along the ground until it finds something on which to grow vertically. It usually has a reddish or orange root. You can kind of see here on this specimen. Many times we don't know that we have bittersweet in our yards until we see it in the trees, and then come fall, the leaves of the maples or the oaks drop off, and we're looking at these vines and fruits and thinking, wow, I never knew my maple had red berries before, when the maple actually has an infestation of Oriental Bittersweet wrapped around the trunk and producing lots and lots of fruit. This vine it can be very difficult to control. We'll look at some small seedlings as we go out, and that's what my suggestion is. When you're controlling invasives, try to recognize these plants when they're small, when they're young, when their root structure is not well developed. Yes, this can be pulled or dug out of the ground when it's this size, but you'll also see specimens, and there are two pieces of bittersweet vines on the table there. Give you an idea of how extensive those could be. And it's much more difficult to get rid of those. We'll talk about some control as we get on our walk. A few more minutes, and then we'll start in on our tour. With bittersweet, the leaves can look a bit different depending on how old the plant is, and sometimes there's just variation in morphology. The Latin name is Celastris orbiculatus, and the orbiculatus describes the orbicular or orb-like or rounded leaf. Kind of see this one here. But bittersweet leaves don't always look like that. A lot of times, the new vines that come out almost reaching out to other vegetation, and look at these. They're more elliptical, more pointed. They're not rounded. So don't be confused and think, oh, this is something else. This isn't bittersweet, when in fact this is the same plant.
Leading off of Glastonbury,
the variation.
Lake.
One of the ways that you can tell the non-native from the native bittersweet are where the fruits develop, and that's really the main thing, because the native bittersweet also has an orange to reddish root. With the non-native bittersweet, the fruits develop at every leaf axil. So every place, young vines might not get touched yet. Every place that you see leaves on vines have little clusters of fruit. The native bittersweet only has fruit at the end of a vine, at the end of a branch. So it doesn't produce as many fruits, as many propagules, as many potential new plants as the non-native species.
But isn't it just as invasive?
The native bittersweet is not as aggressive. There's really not a lot in the state. I don't even know anyone that's actively tracking it. There are some herbarium specimens, and I'm sure it's around. Most of the time when you see bittersweet, it turns out to be the non-native, the invasive one.
Which of these is the biggest threat in Glastonbury?
Bittersweet. I don't know if I can answer that.
Bittersweet.
Or not weed? I don't know.
I'll tell you.
Oh, okay. You know the answer. Okay.
Yeah, I know the answer.
Okay.
There's all of these in Glastonbury, but what's pulling down trees, killing trees?
Right.
These other ones exist, but they're not killing the forest.
No, bittersweet.
It's a big challenge, and this is why we're trying to get efforts in your town, in my town, many towns around Connecticut. We need volunteers, we need people to help, as well as planning and coordination with the town staff. I think you're all off to a really good start, but it takes time. It's nothing that can be done overnight. Let's go. And as you look at these very large in terms of growing, most of them are covered with bittersweet, and in some cases poison ivy. If you look over here in the distance, look at the back. primarily bittersweet on those vines. Someone asked, can the bittersweet and the poison ivy work together to cause more harm? I suppose they could. I really think the bittersweet is much more likely to wrap and to coil around the tree. The poison ivy doesn't usually do that. The poison ivy certainly can weigh down, but with enough growth to hurt, I would say, even smaller or younger trees. Bittersweet is a threat to trees as it wraps around trees and the trees are trying to grow. It's growing too. Remember, as a woody vine, it's not dying back each year. The vines stay even though the leaves and the fruits drop off. So it gets larger and larger, and it can actually sort of strangle or choke the tree as the tree is trying to grow and to expand. It also, as it puts out all its branches, it's competing the sunlight with the desirable for the trees, and so you'll get, the tree will have less opportunity to make food and to grow and for the leaves to expand. Bittersweet and to some extent the poison ivy really takes over.
So that was the other thing that happens with this is I have land built down on Main Street out here that's fenced in Glastonbury Meadow. And what happens is once this stuff matures, and then you get ice and snowstorms, the added weight just brings the trees over, breaks them right down.
Yeah, exactly. You may have been following articles in the paper and on the internet about CLNP and all the extra crews that are being hired to not only clear trees along highways, but to clear vines. And the bittersweet vines are probably number one or number two in terms of how bad that they are. I mean, wild grape also produces a lot of vines, and wild grapes are native, so they sometimes are concerned with trees and weighing the limbs and the trunks down. But bittersweet definitely will do that. And you can look up some of the foliage, and you can see how the vines are entwined on each other.
If these vines were cut low,
Yes.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What was the question?
Over a period
If
of
you
5
cut
years.
them, like if we came through and cut all these vines at 3 feet off the ground, is it going to have an impact?
On the bittersweet.
Yeah.
That's all you do is cut them once. It'll impact everything up in the canopy. That will all die. So that would be the good part.
That's like 30 years of growth.
It can be, yeah. You can count the rings. I mean, the pieces that were on the table were probably 15, 20 years old. So you would have some early impacts, but you can't stop there, and you have to deal with the regrowth, because a vine that's 20 or 30 years old has a lot of carbohydrates and storage materials in those roots,
So
and they're not going to go away.
If it was cut and brushed with herbicide on the cut part when you cut it,
That's one approach. Again, you need to do that more than 1 year, so you'd have to do it probably 2 or 3 seasons. Timing's important, and
So you have to mark them so you know which ones they are.
that's right. You might want to mark them with flagging or some kind of some designations so that you go back and treat those same vines. Yes. Yeah, there's a good question. There's another vine here, and there's poison ivy. That's the taller vine, but then farther down is a 5 palmate or 5 leaflet vine. That's Virginia creeper. And we were talking about that just a little bit. It's a native plant, and it really doesn't get as aggressive as either poison ivy or bittersweet. But being native, we try to encourage native plants as much as possible because they have great impacts for wildlife.
You say it's one approach to cut the vine and then hit it with herbicide.
Yes.
What other approaches?
Other approaches are to cut and do a lot of cutting.
I've been doing it for 20 years.
No, I understand. I can tell you, I've talked to many groups, and sometimes that C word, chemical, we don't mention. It's a decision everybody makes. If people ask me, I provide information, but I'm not here to say you have to use chemicals.